would we miss it? Certainly would not. Right, let's talk now to Jim Loeb. He's in Washington, D.C. He's the Washington, D.C. Bureau Chief, in fact, of the Inter-Press Service News Agency. Jim, good evening. Thank you for being on RT. Nice to see you. The White House has been ramping up pressure on Iran recently. Both candidates have talked about how Tehran shouldn't be allowed to obtain a nuclear weapon. How might the approach to Iran differ, though, depending on who does end up in power end of the day?
Well, I think that's very difficult to predict. I think on the one hand, I think the Obama team is quite determined to avoid any military action, if at all possible. And indeed, we had what are described as leaks out of the White House this past weekend, covered by the New York Times, indicating that Obama is looking for one-on-one talks with Iran. Although the White House denied that report, there seems to be a lot of buzz around it. So presumably something is going on, and it seems also that the Europeans are also encouraging such an approach at this point. And it's something that Obama himself had promised when he ran for president 4 years ago, that he wanted to engage the Iranians directly. Romney, on the other hand, is unlikely to do so. In fact, his campaign has strongly denounced these leaks, as has, for example, the Wall Street Journal, which is a strong supporter of Romney. As to what Romney would actually do, again, I think it's very difficult to predict. He has a range of advisors, from kind of traditional realists like Robert Zoellick, who's the former president of the World Bank, to a group of thinkers who are described best as neoconservatives, who are extremely hawkish on Iran and whose views are very close to those of Bibi Netanyahu, who I think would like nothing better than to somehow get the United States to attack Iran, or Iran's nuclear facilities at the very least.
Jim, what about when it comes to China? Both Obama and Romney have been using China as a scapegoat, blaming the US economic problems on Beijing. Why pin all that on a country that's succeeding, it seems to be, on its own merits on the other side of the world?
Well, China seems to be a perennial election year scapegoat for both parties. Almost every presidential candidate, certainly since Bill Clinton, has attacked the incumbent candidate, in his case, George H.W. Bush, for allegedly being too soft on what Clinton called the butchers of Beijing. That was 3 years after the Tiananmen massacre. But China seems to be a very popular scapegoat, and it's not surprising that both candidates are attacking China, suggesting that its monetary policies it's manipulating the value of its currency and so on and so forth, and that they'll get very tough on China. I suspect that neither candidate's rhetoric on this can be taken particularly seriously, especially Romney, who, as a businessman who's invested in China, knows its value to the United States and its importance in keeping the United States solvent at this point.
Final thoughts from you. What about relations with Russia? One clear difference between the candidates is their positions on Russia. Romney called Moscow America's #1 geopolitical foe. How might that and his leadership impact on relations with Moscow if he gets in?
Well, again, I think that's difficult to predict. On the one hand, you have realists on his team, like Zoellick, who are not particularly antagonistic toward Russia, probably skeptical and suspicious, but not particularly antagonistic or hostile. And on the others, you have neoconservatives who have historically been very anti-Russian, dating back to the Jackson-Vanik Amendment and well before that, for that matter. So nobody really knows what Romney himself really thinks, himself personally. I think your correspondent here covered his position quite well in referring to it as seemingly something locked in the Cold War. But Romney is nothing if not flexible, as he's proven throughout this election campaign.
Be interesting to see what pans out later on tonight at 1 a.m. GMT when that latest and last face-to-face happens. We'll be watching closely. For now, Jim Loeb, got to leave it there, I'm afraid. Washington, D.C. Bureau Chief of the Inter-Press Service News Agency. Thanks for your thoughts.